He was never a household name. He didn't lead armies across continents or deliver fiery speeches in Berlin. Yet Walter Warlimont's pen helped craft the orders that unleashed Hitler's wars. His work translated Hitler's vision into military directives that shaped both battles and atrocities. Was he just a dutiful staff officer caught in a dictator's grip, or a willing architect of destruction hiding behind the desk? Walter Warlimont was born on October 3, 1894, in the garrison town of Osnabrück in northern Germany. His family belonged to the respectable middle class, and like many young men of his generation, he was drawn early into military life. At 17, he entered the Imperial German Army as a cadet, beginning what would become a lifelong career in uniform. The military was not simply a profession for Warlimont. It was a structure that offered order, discipline, and a clear path forward in a rapidly modernizing society. When the First World War broke out in 1914, Warlimont was already in uniform. He served on both the Western and Eastern fronts, gaining valuable experience as an officer. Like so many of his contemporaries, he witnessed the industrialized slaughter that defined the conflict. He was decorated with the Iron Cross, which marked him out as a capable and dedicated soldier. After Germany's defeat in 1918, the army was cut down to a token force of just 100,000 men under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. For many officers, this meant forced retirement. Warlimont was among the fortunate few who were retained in the shrunken Reichswehr. This was no small achievement. It meant he had been identified as a promising figure, someone worth keeping for the future. Within this reduced army, advancement was slow, but survival itself indicated talent and reliability. Throughout the 1920s, he held a series of staff and training posts. In 1922, he served in the 6th Artillery Regiment. By 1927, now a captain, he became second adjutant to General Werner von Blomberg, head of the Truppenamt, the covert successor to the banned German General Staff. This placed Warlimont close to the heart of Germany's quiet military reorganization. In 1929, he was sent abroad. Attached to the US Army for a year, he studied America's theories of industrial mobilization in wartime. The assignment gave him insight into the economic side of modern war. In 1936, Warlimont's career took a new turn. After the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, he was sent as Germany's official delegate to General Francisco Franco's rebel government. His task was to coordinate German aid, men, planes, and weapons for Franco's cause. In Spain, he saw the modern war firsthand. Bombers over Guernica reducing a town to ashes, a grim prelude to what Germany would unleash on Europe. By 1937, Warlimont had ideas of his own about the shape of Germany's military leadership. In a document later called the Warlimont Memorandum, he argued for reorganizing the armed forces under one supreme commander, Adolf Hitler himself. The aim was to weaken the power of the officer caste and tighten control around Hitler. This vision helped create the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, the new high command with Hitler at its top. His career now accelerated. In 1938, he was promoted to colonel and given command of the 26th Artillery Regiment. A year later, as a reward for his loyalty, he was named deputy to General Alfred Jodl in the OKW operations staff. With that step, Walter Warlimont had moved from staff student and planner into the inner circle of men who would draft the orders for Hitler's wars. By the eve of World War II, Warlimont had positioned himself as one of the Wehrmacht's most important staff officers, close enough to power to shape history, but removed enough from the public eye to remain largely unknown. When the Second World War erupted in 1939, Warlimont was serving as deputy chief of the operations staff of the OKW, reporting directly to General Alfred Jodl. In this role, he became one of the men who translated Hitler's ambitions into formal military orders. The title deputy chief might sound bureaucratic, but in practice it placed Warlimont at the very nerve center of the Wehrmacht's strategic machinery. He was the man with the pen, drafting orders that would send millions into battle. The invasion of Poland provided Warlimont's first major test. He was closely involved in drafting operational orders for the attack, and in 1940, he participated in shaping the orders for the invasion of France, Belgium, and the Low Countries. Although others, such as General Erich von Manstein, were more directly credited with developing the actual operational plans, Warlimont's staff ensured that Hitler's approval was transformed into the orders the German army would carry out. It was in these years that Warlimont's signature began appearing on documents that carried far darker implications. As Germany expanded the war to the east, Hitler demanded not only military victories but ideological warfare. Staff officers like Warlimont were ordered to prepare directives such as the Barbarossa Decree and the Commissar Order. These orders sanctioned brutal measures against civilians, partisans, and captured Soviet political officers. Warlimont's job was not to question these policies but to ensure they were circulated and enforced across the military chain of command. His name appeared beneath directives that laid the bureaucratic groundwork for atrocities. Historians still debate the degree of freedom staff officers like Warlimont had in these moments. Some argue that he had little choice but to follow Hitler's demands, as refusal could mean dismissal or worse. Others contend that he was not merely a passive functionary, but an enabler, willingly giving legal and military form to criminal orders. The truth lies somewhere in between. Warlimont was not a policymaker, but his efficiency gave the policies their deadly reach. Despite this, Warlimont was not a figure of charisma or public renown. Unlike Erwin Rommel or Heinz Guderian, he had no battlefield legend attached to his name. Instead, his influence was hidden in the paperwork of OKW headquarters. From 1939 to 42, he was part of a small circle of officers who mediated between Hitler's often erratic directives and the Wehrmacht's generals in the field. His pen ensured that those orders carried the weight of the German High Command. By 1941, with Operation Barbarossa underway, Warlimont's role had become more critical than ever. He never commanded an army, but from his desk he sealed the fate of millions. The image of a bureaucrat might appear harmless, but in the context of Hitler's war, it could be as lethal as a weapon. By 1942, the character of Hitler's war had begun to change. In the early campaigns, the Wehrmacht staff officers, including Walter Warlimont, had exercised a degree of influence in shaping operational orders. But as setbacks mounted, particularly in the Soviet Union, Hitler increasingly took control of military decision-making. For men like Warlimont, this meant their work shifted from offering strategic advice to serving as mere conduits for Hitler's increasingly rigid commands. The operations staff still drafted orders, but the scope for independent planning grew ever smaller. Warlimont's position as deputy to Alfred Jodl meant he was present at the nerve center of this transformation. Meetings in Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters became the defining feature of his wartime life. Here he witnessed firsthand the Führer's obsessive interference, micromanaging deployments down to the divisional level. Warlimont's role became one of drafting and polishing orders after Hitler had already dictated them, a task that frustrated many officers but also shielded him from direct responsibility for operational failures. Still, his signature continued to appear on documents that extended Hitler's will across Europe. As the war dragged on, Germany's military situation deteriorated rapidly. The catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad in early 1943 and the failure at Kursk later that year left the Wehrmacht permanently on the defensive. For Warlimont, the pressures mounted. He was responsible for coordinating complex movements of armies retreating across vast distances, while Hitler demanded that no ground be surrendered. The operations staff often issued contradictory or impossible orders, reflecting the growing chaos within the German command system. Amid this atmosphere of frustration and despair, opposition to Hitler began to take shape among some officers. The most dramatic moment came on July 20, 1944, when Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg placed a bomb inside Hitler's conference room at the Wolf's Lair. Warlimont was in the building that day. The explosion tore through the wooden barracks, killing 4 people and injuring many others. Warlimont was among the wounded, suffering severe injuries that left him partly disabled for the rest of his life. The irony of his presence in this assassination attempt was striking. He was not part of the conspiracy against Hitler, yet he became one of its victims. Some scholars note that his injuries effectively removed him from active duty during the final collapse of the Reich, sparing him from being directly associated with the last desperate decisions of Hitler's regime. Others argue that this accident of fate later worked in his favor, allowing him to claim he was less responsible for Germany's downfall. After the July 20th plot, Hitler's paranoia deepened, and the atmosphere within the High Command grew ever more oppressive. Warlimont, recovering from his wounds, played only a limited role in the final months of the war. With Germany's surrender in May 1945, the Allied powers turned their attention not only to frontline commanders, but also to the staff officers whose signatures had given Hitler's orders legend and military form. Warlimont, as deputy chief of the Wehrmacht operations staff, was among those arrested and investigated. Unlike Rommel, who had died before the war ended, or Jodl and Keitel, who were tried in the main Nuremberg trial, Warlimont would face judgment in a later proceeding, the High Command trial, one of the subsequent Nuremberg trials held between 1947 and 48. The charges against Warlimont were sweeping. He was accused of crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Prosecutors argued that his role in transmitting and signing key directives, including the infamous Commissar Order and the Barbarossa Decree, made him complicit in the systemic brutality of the war in the East. The argument was simple. While he had not personally pulled a trigger, his bureaucratic efficiency had enabled mass violence. Warlimont defended himself by portraying his work as purely administrative. He claimed he was merely a middleman, passing down instructions dictated by Hitler and Jodl. The tribunal did not accept his defense in full. In 1948, Warlimont was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. He was imprisoned in Landsberg prison, the same facility where Hitler had written Mein Kampf 2 decades earlier. For a time, it seemed his story would end behind bars, yet the political context of the early Cold War soon intervened. As tensions with the Soviet Union escalated, the Western Allies began commuting sentences for many German officers in an effort to integrate West Germany into the Western Bloc. Warlimont's sentence was reduced to 18 years, and in 1957 he was released after serving less than a decade. In the years that followed, Warlimont attempted to reshape his image. He published memoirs, most notably Inside Hitler's Headquarters, 1939–1945. In these writings, he cast himself as a professional soldier caught in an impossible situation. He emphasized his limited influence and insisted he had opposed some of Hitler's irrational decisions. This self-portrayal echoed a wider narrative among former Wehrmacht officers, the so-called clean Wehrmacht myth, which sought to distance the army from the worst crimes of the Nazi regime. Historians, however, remain skeptical. Archival evidence shows that Warlimont's name appeared on numerous orders that directly facilitated atrocities. While he may not have designed the policies, his role in transmitting and legitimizing them cannot be ignored. Some scholars argue that his memoirs were a deliberate attempt to obscure his complicity and present himself as a victim of circumstance rather than an enabler of criminal policy. Warlimont lived quietly after his release, settling in Bavaria. He avoided public attention and spent his final years in relative obscurity. When he died in 1976, he was far less notorious than men like Keitel or Jodl, yet his career exemplified the broader complicity of Germany's officer corps. His legacy is a reminder that wars are not only fought by generals in the field, but also men behind desks, drafting orders that can prove just as deadly. Walter Warlimont's story is a reminder that war isn't only fought with tanks and guns, but also with paper and ink. And that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching. If you want to dive deeper into the lives of German generals, check out our other videos like Paul von Kleist, the Nazi field marshal who died in Stalin's prison. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next video. And we'll see you in the next one.